The contract was straightforward. Sing for a wedding party from dusk until dawn. The pay was a king's ransom, impossible to turn down for a single night's work. What they failed to mention was that the guests weren't exactly human, and the first time I stopped singing was the last time I saw any of them blink. That night redefined everything I knew about music and about real fear. My name is Noura. For years, I was one of the most popular folk singers in Kuwait. My band and I were hired for the most extravagant weddings, for the wealthiest families you can imagine. But no amount of money could have prepared me for what we walked into at that mansion. It's a story I've been hesitant to share, but if you're ready, do me a small favor and tap the like button, because this is one wedding story you will never forget. It all began on a day I had specifically blocked off. This was the mid-1990s, and my all-female band was at the top of our game. Our schedule was a constant storm of parties and performances across the Gulf, so a day off was a treasure. Then the phone rang. The woman on the other end was insistent. Her daughter was getting married that very night, and she was a huge fan of mine. She actually said her daughter would call off the entire wedding if I didn't perform. I tried to say no, explaining it was my only day to rest, but she wouldn't take no for an answer, her voice pleading. Then she made an offer that stopped me in my tracks. 500 Kuwaiti dinars. For the time, that was an insane amount of money, more than double our usual fee. Against my better judgment, with a strange knot already tightening in my stomach, I said yes. The wedding was at a private home in the Sabahiya district, a long drive south of the city, scheduled for 10 o'clock that night. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but the money was too good to pass up. I called my band, 6 of the best musicians I knew, and we got ready for the night ahead. The further we drove, the worse that bad feeling got. The roads grew unfamiliar. The city lights vanished in our rearview mirror, and soon we were wrapped in a deep, quiet darkness. The address led us to a mansion that just sort of appeared out of nowhere. It was a grand, palatial building that looked both incredibly rich and unnervingly old. It was strung with lavish lights for the wedding, but the property was eerily silent. It just didn't feel like a celebration. We were met at the door by the mother of the bride, the same woman from the phone. As she went down the line greeting my band members, I saw a few of them shoot each other nervous looks. One of my girls, Shams, told me later that when the woman kissed her cheek, her skin felt feverishly hot, but her hands were as rough and cold as stone. I just told her she was tired, trying to ignore the dread that was starting to creep in. They led us to a room to get ready, but the main hall, it stole my breath, and not in a good way. The stage was draped in heavy, dark red fabric, twisted in a way that made it look like a giant screaming mouth. The bride was a bizarre sight. She sat next to the groom in a black dress that was covered in strange, cryptic symbols I'd never seen before. The groom was just as strange, dressed in an old-fashioned, almost Ottoman-era style, and he never said a word. It was all deeply unsettling, but the guests were starting to fill the room, and we had a job to do. The moment we started playing, the hall filled with elegantly dressed guests, but something was off about them. Their movements were too fluid, their faces eerily pale, and I realized none of them were blinking. They danced with this frantic, hypnotic energy that was both mesmerizing and deeply disturbing, their bodies bending in ways that just didn't seem possible. The air in the room got thick, heavy. Even their applause was wrong, harsh and jarring, like it was just slightly out of sync with the music. My band members were professionals, and they kept playing, but I could see the panic rising in their eyes. That unease tipped into pure terror when my bandmate Shems caught my eye, her face ghostly white. She gave a slight, subtle nod downwards. I followed her gaze to the dance floor. As the women spun and their dresses swirled, I saw it. Beneath the expensive fabric, their legs weren't human. They were covered in dark, coarse fur, and they ended not in feet, but in hooves, goat legs. My blood turned to ice. I looked at my bandmates, and in that one silent, horrified glance, we all understood. These weren't people. We were playing at a wedding for the Jinn. In our folklore, Jinn are supernatural beings made from smokeless fire, living in a world parallel to ours, and we had just stumbled right into it. The shock was too much for one of the girls in my band. She fainted right on stage. A few of the women glided towards us, their smiles frozen on their faces, and asked what was wrong. Thinking faster than I ever have in my life, I blurted out that she was just overheated from the performance. I knew right then and there, showing fear would be a death sentence. We had to keep playing. We had to pretend everything was fine. The rest of the night was a waking nightmare. We played on, hands shaking, voices trembling, forcing smiles while our minds were screaming. We didn't dare stop. Every time our tempo slowed, one of the guests would glide over, their eyes holding some ancient, terrifying power, and demand that we continue. The music was the only thing keeping us safe. At one point, I had to step away. I made my way through the maze-like corridors, just trying to find a corner to breathe. The upstairs was dark and looked abandoned, so different from the party below. As I walked down a hall, I had this terrifying flash of a vision, the bride in her black dress, chasing me through the darkness. It was gone in a second, but the fear was real. Then I saw a little boy standing at the end of the hall, beckoning me to follow him. He led me to a heavy, locked door. As I reached for it, a low, inhuman voice rumbled from the other side, a voice that vibrated right through the wood into my bones. It called itself a friend, and it ordered me to go back downstairs and sing. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to the stage, my heart pounding. The message was clear. My voice was the price for our lives. The night dragged on for an eternity. My bandmate Shams was starting to lose it. She whispered to me that she was seeing things, faces moving in the walls, a blurry figure with glowing eyes lurking in the corner, a presence that felt like it was trying to pull her voice right out of her throat. We were trapped, held hostage by our own music. singing for our lives to a room full of monsters. The hours just bled together. We were running on nothing but pure adrenaline and the kind of primal fear that keeps you on your feet. The guests never got tired. They just danced and danced, their energy endless. We just kept watching the windows, praying for the first sign of morning. In our beliefs, the morning call to prayer, the adhan, is what forces the Jinn back to their world. Then, just as the sky was turning from black to the darkest blue of pre-dawn, it happened. At exactly 3 a.m., the lights in the mansion flickered and went out. We had just stopped playing, and the silence that followed was absolute, deafening. The entire hall was plunged into pitch black darkness, and it felt like everyone inside had just vanished. We didn't think. We scrambled off that stage into the suffocating dark, leaving behind thousands of dollars and instruments without a second thought. We fumbled our way to the main door and burst out into the cool night air. We sprinted down the long driveway, not daring to look back, terrified we were being chased. As we were running down the deserted road, a single figure appeared in the gloom. It was an old man walking to the local mosque for the dawn prayer. Seeing our terrified faces and our fancy clothes, he stopped and stared. He asked us what on earth we were doing out here at this hour. I gasped out the whole story, the wedding, the huge mansion, the awful guests. The man's face went pale. He looked at us with a mix of shock and pity. "What mansion?" he asked. He pointed in the direction we had just run from. I turned, and my heart stopped. There was no palace. There was no grand lit-up mansion. There was only a crumbling, derelict ruin of a house that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The man told us our worst fears were true. The house had been empty for over 10 years, he said. Everyone in the area knew to stay away. It was haunted, a known home of the Jinn. We hadn't just played a wedding. We had survived one. I never sang again after that night. The experience was so terrifying, it silenced the music inside me. My entire band quit right along with me. Years later, the only reason this story exists is because I told it to a journalist for a recording, on one condition, that it never be aired. I didn't want any fame from this. I just needed someone to know it happened. We walked into a party and ended up in a supernatural prison where the only thing that kept us alive was a song. It really makes you wonder about that thin line between our world and theirs, and what happens when you get an invitation to cross it. What would you have done? Would you have kept singing? Let me know in the comments.